The police didn't believe the men had been abducted until they left the room with a hidden tape recorder running. What that tape captured in the silence changed everything. Today, we're looking at the Pascagoula incident through a hauntingly honest lens.
Authorities say a Jackson County man who claimed he was taken aboard a spacecraft early this month was telling the truth as to what he believes happened.
It was meant to be a pleasant evening's fishing by the Pascagoula River in the port town of Pascagoula, Mississippi. But for the 45-year-old Charlie Hickson and his 18-year-old friend and co-worker Calvin Parker, the events of the night of the 11th of October 1973 turned out to be a living nightmare. Later reporting to the local police, who were in disbelief upon hearing the men's story, Hickson told of an encounter which went like this. Hickson and Parker were fishing when all of a sudden a curious silver craft appeared to descend around 30 feet in front of the pair whilst giving off a blue light. It didn't land exactly, it remained hovering close to the ground. Then a hatch opened and 3 5-foot-tall aliens floated out. Their grey skin was wrinkled like an elephant's, their hands clawed like crabs, their heads shaped like bullets, they had no necks, and their mouths were slits. Eyes could not be seen because of the wrinkles. Parker faints at the sight. Hickson says he was rendered immobile, and the aliens floated him onto their spacecraft. The interior was very bright. He was laid on a table, looking up, and a huge electronic eye descended. And this robotic apparatus performed a full examination of Hickson. Around 20 minutes later, they were back outside the craft. The sheriff in the police department, Fred Diamond, said he and his officers tried to get the pair to speak sense, but it was impossible. Sheriff Diamond was on their side regardless, and is later quoted as saying the first thing they wanted to do was to take a lie detector test. Charlie was badly shaken, and Calvin? I heard that boy pray when he thought nobody could hear. And this is my first interjection. Parker is noted in some accounts as 18 years old and in others 19. His birthday was November 2nd, 1954, so he is actually still 18 at the time of the incident, but turning 19 in the weeks shortly afterwards. Sheriff Diamond noted they immediately asked for a lie detector, or more accurately a polygraph. Now, we know today these are largely unreliable, but in 1973 they were the gold standard for truth. Interestingly, it wasn't the men who asked first, but their attorney, Joe Caringo, a day later. It also seems a little odd that the sheriff said that, right? I'd want a nice cup of tea and a neurologist. If you'd just been floated onto a spaceship, would a lie detector be your first thought? Let me know in the comments, because this choice actually tells us a lot about the mindsets of those involved. As it turns out, Sheriff Diamond said no to the polygraph, given they didn't have the equipment and there was something else he'd found to be all the evidence he needed to believe the pair. After giving their initial accounts to the police, Hickson and Parker were left on their own in a room. They didn't know it at the time, but the police had hidden a voice-activated recorder in a drawer in the room, and it picked up a strange exchange between the pair. To my ears, on one hand, it's almost like they're checking their accounts with each other, repeating statements to double down, bouncing off each other in an almost trance-like meditative state. On the other hand, and most certainly in Parker's case, it seems like he is in a shocked state, saying he just wants to go home, and he actually does say he wants to see a doctor, which makes me happy. Effectively, he feels he's going to fall apart. The younger man does not come across as robust compared to the more experienced Hickson, who was a decorated combat veteran of the Korean War and knew something about seeing things and compartmentalising them for another day. In fairness, on the recording, I think he's also in shock in a way. He just deals with it in a different, more resolute way. It still makes me think this is something like self-hypnosis done by the two together, with the suggestions mostly made by Hickson. And I don't think this is necessarily evidence of hoaxing, but we will get into that in a later section. The hidden tape is often cited as the smoking gun of this case. Listen to the fear in their voices and tell me, does that sound like two guys running a con, or two men in total shock?
I keep sleeping that like it doesn't I'm just laying there crazy. But yeah, when it brought you out of that damn thing, and when it brought me out, well, I like to know where the hell you know. God damn, I like to know where the hell got you straightened out, man. Well, that monitor, I remember my arms, they just froze out just like that, and I couldn't move, just like I stepped on a damn rattlesnake. They didn't do me that way, though. I passed out. That's the first time I ever passed out in my life. Except for new medical records. And I've never seen nothing like that before in my life. It's hard. You can't make people believe that, though.
This is the conversation that so convinced Sheriff Diamond the pair were telling the truth. The shift was definitely felt by the both of them when the police talked to them afterwards. It was kinder, friendlier and less dismissive. The tape was the psychological evidence, but as we'll see shortly, there was physical evidence too, right down to the glass of the car they used to escape the abduction site. The immediate aftermath of the pair making their experience known had them checked out at the nearby Keesler Air Force Base for radiation, which they were both clear of. UFO investigators arrived, namely Dr. J. Allen Hynek, who had been a UFO consultant for the US Air Force and was controversial amongst fellow scientists, something I'll have to look at in depth in another video. And at Hynek's request, Dr. James Harder of the Aerial Phenomena Research Organisation. Dr. Harder was sent from APRO as he was available, and a civil engineer who happened to be a certified hypnotist, both roles which APRO valued. Personally, I'm not sure how much good hypnosis really does in these cases, similar to how polygraphs are an imperfect way to get results. But that was the done thing back then. Speaking of polygraphs, it turns out Hickson did take one and passed, but the examiner was not a professional polygrapher. Hickson was offered a second test conducted by a trained professional, but he refused. Both men underwent hypnosis, and here's where the tale gets really problematic. APRO's bulletin uses Dr. Harder's notes to explain what happened, and it's under hypnosis where we get the recorded description of the encounter, including the aliens with which we started the story. However, under hypnosis, the claim of Parker fainting is made. This wouldn't really be a problem except for one big concerning piece of information. In later years, Parker made the claim he had not fainted. He was so scared, yes, and didn't want to talk about it at all. So Hickson decided he'd do the talking and they'd just say Parker fainted as they were yeeted by the aliens. This would save Parker from doing any real talking and Hickson could just roll with it. And if that's the case, we're left with something of a choice, and it's not one I like very much. Firstly, in one instance, I can suggest that the hypnosis didn't really work in the way they wanted it to because a lie was told during the session, so I don't know if I'd want to be as confident or bold making a claim about the veracity of the information given, such as Dr. Harder did whilst talking to the press. He said, "The two displayed such feelings of terror under hypnosis that would be virtually impossible to fake, and there was definitely something here that was not terrestrial. Where they came from and why they are here is a matter of conjecture, but the fact that they are here on this planet is true beyond a reasonable doubt." Dr. Hynek stated, "The experience was indeed a real one. It was no hallucination." It's important to note that a mix-up by the press at the time attributed what Harder and Hynek said incorrectly. They swapped them around. These statements are assigned correctly according to Philip J. Klass in his book UFOs Explained. Regardless, they seemed convinced. To them, there was no middle ground. But if we look past the extraterrestrial certainty offered by the experts of the time, we're left with a different kind of choice. Is it possible for two men to experience something so terrifyingly real, yet entirely terrestrial? To find out, we have to look away from the stars and at the men themselves. The rational explanation for this case gave me chills because it suggests the mind can be just as terrifying as any alien. I want to give these guys the benefit of the doubt. I actually think I'm in general agreement with the police. Hearing the pair talking when they think no one else is listening, it just gets me. Maybe I'm a gullible softie, but in 2018, Glenn Ryder, who was a captain and former county sheriff's investigator who had dealt with the initial report at the time, said about Parker, that boy was upset. And he don't get upset about nothing. He wasn't playing either. If he were acting, he should have been in Hollywood. I just don't feel it's fair to write them off as hoaxers, even if the story is beyond belief. I even really feel for Parker, as he spent a fair bit of his life keeping out of the spotlight. He was said to really hate it, and he really didn't make another peep until releasing a book in 2018 on the subject. Asked why he waited so long to do so, he said, "I felt like everyone deserved an explanation. Everyone has an expiration date, and I wanted to get this out there before I die." In his book, he explains his family had been good friends with Hickson's when Parker was growing up in Sandersville, Mississippi. Hickson and Parker's dad went fishing together and took their kids with them. Parker even says Hickson once saved his life when a mishap in the river could have led to Parker drowning. I believe this created a bond of absolute trust, a bond that would later become a crucial piece of the psychological puzzle. It's quite clear from both their books the families got on well, and Hickson, as I mentioned earlier, was a decorated combat veteran who served in the Korean War and later became a well-respected constable in Jones County. He was married with 5 children, and he seems like a guy everyone would have time for. A few jobs after his constable role, he was working in the F.B. Walker and Sons shipyard on the Pascagoula River. He moved house and lived with his family in a 3-bedroom apartment in Gautier, just down the I-90 from Pascagoula. Parker, on the other hand, states he wasn't really the academic type, so he left school early. He actually became a school bus driver at the age of 16, which is where he met his future wife. I mean, if he'd been much older than 16, it would be quite scandalous. And it's absolutely mad to think that level of responsibility being given to a kid. But the 1970s, right? Anyway, after a few jobs and learning to read blueprints in a welding job, he and said future wife, Dorothy Waynette Parker, are engaged. And Parker wants a steady job with more standard hours. It seemed he was ready to settle. His solid family upbringing had left him in a good stead to actually succeed. His father recommended talking to Hickson to see if the older man could get him a job at the shipyard, and Hickson was happy to oblige. He even offered Parker the spare bedroom in his apartment, which Parker says cost $50 a month. It all feels so decent, pleasant and warm, and it makes it really hard to disbelieve the story from these two. Now, I'm sure they would have had their ups and downs. Parker was still a teenager, and even with good upbringing, teenagers are going to teen. But they barely got to find out because less than a week later, after starting work at the shipyard, the abduction incident occurred. So, let's look at it again, a little more closely. In Mississippi, on the 11th of October, the historical average temperature has a maximum of 25 degrees Celsius. To me, a person who generally doesn't enjoy anything over 15 degrees, this seems like a specialised layer of the abyss I would not do so well in. And I can't imagine how hardcore you'd have to be to work in a shipyard, wearing the right gear for working with metal, for an unreasonably long day shift. Parker mentions getting up at 4 a.m. for work the day after, so I'll imagine that's a typical starting point. He says the day of the 11th was long and hot, and during the early afternoon lunch break, Hickson proposed the fishing trip. He probably thought it would be the ideal way to cool off and wind down after such a long shift, and although initially not wanting to go along, Parker eventually acquiesced. It's approximately 6 p.m. when they get to their fishing spot at an old abandoned shipyard near the Highway 90 toll bridge. They don't catch much initially, which frustrates Parker, but Hickson convinces him to stick at it a little longer. For some reason, Parker then turns around. Hickson echoes the movement, and this is when they see the blue lights of the spacecraft. Hickson claims he hears a zipping sound as the craft approaches, and really, depending on your source, the distance this thing is from the pair varies from 30 to 80 feet. Well, I suppose it was approaching them, so the distance could vary, but it's a discrepancy. Then the size of the craft is debatable, again depending on who you listen to or read. The World's Greatest UFO Mysteries book went with the craft being 100 feet long, and I'm not exactly sure where they got that number from. The other sources I'm using for this video, including Hickson's book account, state the craft was anywhere from 16 to 30 feet long, and Parker has since declared it to be around 80 feet, so that's incredibly helpful. It had appeared around a distance of 30 to 40 feet behind them and was around 8 to 10 foot high. It was silent. It hovered around 2 feet off the ground. Compared with the length, everybody seems mostly happy with the 8 to 10 foot in height. Yay. The aliens themselves feel nice and unique. We do have a thing for greys, but not like these ones. Very different to other reports of the time, which is possibly one of the reasons this encounter story stuck with the public imagination. Have a look at the pictures drawn of these creatures and see what you think. Both Parker and Hickson report feeling like they are injected with something, which prompts them to physically relax during the abduction sequence. And this is something I find interesting, although Parker only mentions it in his book, which presents me with an issue which I'll come back to in a few moments. They are then separated, but examined in more or less the same fashion by the robotic eye, and then returned to their fishing spot. And here's another problem. The amount of time spent on the craft brings forth differing estimates from the pair. Hickson went with around 20 minutes, but Parker says 45 minutes. But a notch in that one, we'll come back to it. Outside, Hickson has come to his senses first, and hears that same zipping sound from earlier as the craft disappears. He's trying to get a response from Parker, who's confused, and then they just sit quietly for a short time. Parker's later account asserts he too heard the same sound as the craft shot up and out of the atmosphere. He also says they shouldn't tell anyone about what happened. Basically, the lad just wants to go home and forget all about it. It's not long before they are making their way back over to the car Parker drove them over in, only the window on the passenger side door was cracked. It hadn't fallen through until Hickson opened the door, causing the glass to completely shatter to the ground. And this is a crucial detail. The car was a 1973 Rambler Hornet, brand new. It shouldn't have had any damage to the window, and it certainly shouldn't have struggled to start, and yet they said it did. To the men, this wasn't just a mechanical failure, it was proof that whatever happened out there had followed them back to the physical world. Now, pause for just a second. A brand new car, it doesn't just fail to start, and glass doesn't crack for no reason. Was it a mechanical failure, or was it, as we'll explore, a physical manifestation of their total panic? In the car, Hickson has a few swigs from a bourbon whiskey bottle, whilst Parker is back in the driver's seat. Although Parker had meant to drive home, they find themselves pulling up at the offices of the Mississippi Press newspaper. According to a journalist for the now-defunct paper, Judy Johnson, the pair scared the ladies' cleaning crew as they were loudly banging on doors for attention. The cleaners stayed quiet, and then the men went away, assuming no one was there to assist them. I still wonder why they stopped at a newspaper first, but it's something I've resigned myself to never really knowing. I find it just a bit odd, however. It's a detail that doesn't fit the innocent victim mould perfectly, and on this channel we don't ignore the details that don't fit. Next, the men find themselves at a bar, where both have a beer, making an attempt to stay calm. But then Hickson wants them to leave. He wants to find a phone. He needs to tell someone in authority, and that authority is the US Air Force at the Keesler base in Biloxi. Stopping at a payphone by the side of the road, Hickson makes the call to the airbase. A woman answers and dismisses him outright on the basis the Air Force no longer deals with such cases, given Project Blue Book, the official investigation into the UFO phenomenon, had closed in 1969. She advises him to go to the police instead. And now we catch up with them at the police, who were at first disbelieving until they heard the hidden tape. Somehow the incident leaks out to the press, which Hickson and Parker are firmly against, though I still have it ticking in the back of my mind that that's exactly who they went to first. Were they so in shock they didn't really think that through? Relatively quickly, Hickson just goes with it and ultimately makes something of a career out of the incident. And he's quite personable, seems down to earth, no pun. In fairness, perhaps he clocked it was all going to get out of hand in a big way. Why not at least retain something from it that worked in his favour? Parker was the opposite. He couldn't get out of it fast enough. In his book, he actually says he ended up just moving around a lot, getting new jobs, because he couldn't risk the recognition. The constant press kept up even after 7 years, which was when he and his wife got divorced. Like others I've talked about in my other UFO videos, he was so affected by his experience, he just wanted no part of it. Later on, he remarried his ex-wife, and she encouraged him to write this book after Hickson had died in 2011 at the age of 80, and ill health had started to take a toll on Parker. He died aged 68 in the August of 2023. It's important when dealing with paranormal stories and accounts across the entire board of all things spooky that we take time to really look for rational explanations. It's equally as important to be respectful to people who believe they've had these experiences, which seem to be so far beyond our ordinary day-to-day lives. When I think I'm finding holes in this story, I don't mean to suggest absolutely nothing happened to Hickson and Parker in October 1973. I look at the photos, I hear the hidden tape, and I can't help but think these guys have been through something. I've mentioned before in the 1973 video how there's a big overlap in paranormal witness accounts in the perception of other beings, creatures, ghosts, which appears to be explainable by the witness actually being in a hypnagogic state, also known as a waking dream, which is similar to a trance state where an individual can experience hallucinations, where the body is in the passive sleep state whilst the mind is awake. It doesn't explain everything paranormal ever, no, but I think it's a really good indicator of what could have happened in Pascagoula. Joe Nickel, PhD, writing for the Skeptical Inquirer in 2012, re-examined the Pascagoula incident as a cold case and pointed out a few things which I have to be in agreement with. Firstly, the hypnagogic state. Hickson stating he was floated in, things were floating about, and the fact he heard the aliens talking in his head, the intense bright lights of the spacecraft's interior, all of this correlates with reported sensations from people experiencing sleep paralysis and hypnagogia. I've experienced it myself a couple of times, and I don't mind saying it's incredibly eerie and unsettling at first, and it does feel frighteningly real, but it isn't. Okay, you might say, but what about Parker? Can they really have hypnagogia and sleep paralysis at the same time? No worries, Nickel's got a great explanation for that too. Now, we know the story was initially Parker had passed out, and it's claimed later it's because he just didn't want to talk about it and would let Hickson do all the talking instead. Nickel states this would be consistent with an example of a folie à deux, a French expression, the folie of two, in which a percipient convinces another of some alleged occurrence, as by the power of suggestion, the force of a dominant personality or the like, or the other person simply acquiesces for whatever reason. And let's remember what had literally just happened to this 18-year-old lad. He had just started a new job working for Hickson, was renting a room in Hickson's home. He was therefore incredibly reliant upon Hickson. He knew him from childhood, a family friend. You have to think about the sort of almost parent-child relationship it might have been, and how Parker, even when he's not wanted to, tends to just give in and go along with what Hickson wants. I mean, Parker didn't even want to go fishing on that evening. And here's the other thing he said himself. It was a long, hot day. Working as a ship fitter in ridiculous conditions. I'm only surprised there wasn't more straight-up hallucinations going on. The moment with the car, the brand new Hornet Rambler with the broken window that failed to start, well, we can add that failure in as potential evidence for hypnagogia and the folie à deux. Think of it as the men being so affected that the world around them became difficult to navigate. When in shock or panicking, when you are literally unable to think straight, it can be much harder to retain the motor skills to interact with objects. It's no wonder the car was difficult to start. But the thing I can't explain, however, is the broken window. That kind of just gets me. Or at least it did, until I read a bit further into this case. Captain Glenn Ryder, who interviewed the pair and was kindly disposed towards them, also confirmed he went out to look at the area where the two men had been fishing after he had interviewed them. He found no evidence. To my knowledge, he does not even mention broken glass on the ground from the broken window of the car. You'd think he would if it were there, right? He did say there had been other reports of lights in the area on that night, but hadn't included them in his report. But wouldn't it have been great if he had? If there had been someone out to check on those as well, so they could be definitively linked or discarded? There have been other people who have come forward in recent years saying they too saw things, and maybe they did, but they can't be directly corroborated for the same reason as those lights Ryder states were reported at the time, just not recorded. They could be the same aliens. They could not be the same aliens. It's really not possible to know. I often think that leaving a story to when the other witness or witnesses can't contradict or support the claim is, well, it's a choice. In this instance, perhaps understandable. But I do wonder if Parker felt he couldn't really say anything whilst Hickson was alive. This isn't to say Hickson was some kind of monster, goodness no, but saying anything that might even slightly contradict Hickson's account is something Parker would feel unable to do. He owed Hickson so much after all. But he doesn't really contradict, and in some passages he's using the exact same words. To some people that might bring credibility, but I'm just left unsure. For all the agreement in their accounts, still standing out to me is the time differences for the experience. 20 minutes for Hickson versus 45 for Parker, which is then extended in his book to close to an hour. I do imagine under stressful circumstances, the ability to estimate time isn't going to be fantastic, similar to motor responses and failing to start a car. And Parker said he wasn't exactly wearing a watch. But it's again a curious detail and another indicator that Parker didn't want to contradict Hickson whilst he was alive. Something else to ponder over is the location of the incident. It was Hickson's choice for the fishing spot, and Parker is noted as saying he saw signs which suggested it wasn't entirely legal for them to be there. So when he initially saw blue lights, he thought it was the police. He also says the I-90 bridge was to the left of them. So, using a video news piece from the Clarion Ledger, I believe this places it around the Port River Road on the banks of the Pascagoula River. And this is something of an issue, as Philip J. Klass puts it in UFOs Explained. All this occurred within several hundred feet of the US Highway 90, yet none of the passing motorists had reported seeing the glowing flying saucer hovering a few feet above the ground where it would be readily visible. Yeah, when you look at the abduction site, it is very strange how no one else noticed the incident occurring. There's an additional piece of evidence we can also consider. Both men believed they were injected in one arm with something, and there were puncture wounds to back this up. The photographs came with a typed note, said to be from Dr. Harder, the man from APRO who investigated the case with Dr. Hynek. The note claims these are the puncture wounds. Calvin Parker learned of the photos later on and didn't remember them being taken. He confirmed, however, that Harder had examined both himself and Hickson. But Dr. Harder was not a medical doctor. He was a civil engineer with research into fluid mechanics and hydraulics. He was clearly a really intelligent guy, yes, and did actually help pioneer medical devices later on in his career, but he was not a medical doctor, and I just don't think it's right that we take this paper as absolute evidence of some kind of injection taking place. I don't even know if the photos are puncture wounds. I mean, I want someone who is or has worked in the relevant medical fields to tell me that. Civil engineering and fluid mechanics, yes, fantastic, but I don't see a civil engineer when I want a medical checkup, do I? The website showing the photos and the type note does not claim these to be 100% evidence. There is no one alive, it seems, who can. And this is one of the most frustrating parts of looking into these old cases, and something we just have to accept we'll never know. The only thing I think that can be done is to apply a better procedure to modern encounters. I also think it's not unreasonable to suggest such minor wounds could occur whilst in the hypnagogic state. Hey, if Dr. Harder can do medical exams without being a medical doctor, I can do psychology with my teeny tiny A-level in psychology. Additionally, we've already mentioned how noises are a vivid part of that experience, so why not the noise and sensation of an injection? I know there'll be people that don't like this sort of reasoning, it was hypnagogia and sleep paralysis and folie à deux theory, but it is a very acceptable, natural explanation. Like I said, sleep paralysis is really scary. It's probably quite disturbing to witness, and the human brain is a funky and strange place of which we don't know everything. It doesn't mean there were aliens, but it does mean the men still had a really frightening experience, which I would not hold against them. If only someone had said something like that to them at the time. But people desperate to prove aliens exist got there first, and I think it only reinforced the belief the two men had really been abducted by aliens. When challenged on the fact he was adding more details not originally reported, Hickson doubled down further, enabled by people like Dr. Hynek. Hickson and Parker deserved better. They certainly needed support and not ridicule, but just not in this way. This is the thing that really makes me sad about cases like these. Instead of, you experienced something horrible but natural, now let's help you quietly get on with the rest of your lives with the dignity you deserve, it becomes a media circus and ruins the life of one of the men involved. Honestly, I'm just glad Parker was finally able to reunite with his family after so many years apart. In 2019, a memorial plaque to the incident was placed in Lighthouse Park, Pascagoula. At the opening ceremony, Charles Hickson's family attended, and his son, Charles Hickson Jr., thought the plaque was wonderful. I just wish my dad was here to see it. He would have been quite proud. Calvin Parker, also in attendance at the ceremony, was overjoyed and said, "It is emotional for me. I wish when I died I could be buried right here underneath this plaque. It is quite an honour." And this feels a fitting close to the Pascagoula abduction incident. Whatever actually happened, a community got together to finally give some peace to the families involved. This Pascagoula case is huge. I've barely even covered the role the media played, or how Philip J. Klass had a magnificent skeptical takedown of the whole case, which I will come back to in a minisode soon. I was just so struck with these two ordinary men and how, in this year where there were numerous alleged UFO sightings and encounters, how did this case become the biggest one? I'm still not entirely sure, but for me it was a fascinating look at how two people can share the exact same experience but react in completely opposite ways. I'd like to examine those ways a lot more in depth, although that's also for a different video. For now, though, the Pascagoula incident leaves us with a haunting question. Did these men meet visitors from the stars, or did the heat, the stress, and the power of suggestion create a shared nightmare from which they could never escape? Oh, what a case. I am left swinging from clearly something incredibly traumatic happened to much of it was obviously made up. I don't think it's aliens. I'd need more concrete evidence to suggest it's anything but another weirdly trippy angle of the human experience. But in the next video, we're looking at the man who helped validate this case, Dr. J. Allen Hynek. How did the government's leading UFO skeptic become the ultimate believer? Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss out. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.